Chloe, get down from there right now. You're going to ruin your grandmother's azaleas. My mother's voice cut through the backyard like a knife. My 7-year-old daughter froze on the garden ledge where she'd been carefully balancing, her small feet nowhere near any flowers. Her face fell as she quickly jumped down and ran to my side, shoulders hunched. I glanced over to where my sister Melissa's twins, Aiden and Ethan, were literally swinging from a low branch of Mom's prized magnolia tree, one that had been strictly off-limits to my children since they could walk. As I watched, Aiden gave a final tug, and a small branch snapped off in his hand. My mother, who had been staring daggers at Chloe just seconds before, didn't even look their way. "That's the third time today," I whispered to my husband, Dan, who squeezed my hand in silent support. We'd driven 3 hours to Lakewood, Pennsylvania for my parents' annual Memorial Day barbecue, and we'd been here less than 40 minutes. "Maybe she didn't see," Dan offered, but we both knew better. The pattern was too consistent, too predictable. For 4 years now, ever since I'd had kids of my own, every family gathering played out the same way. My children walking on eggshells while my sister's kids ran wild without consequence. That evening, as the adults gathered around the patio table for dessert, my 10-year-old son Lucas approached with his cousin Ethan. "Grandma, can we have some ice cream?" Lucas asked politely, hands folded behind his back like I'd taught him. Mom barely looked up from her conversation with my sister. "Not now, Lucas. You've had enough sugar today. Go play until the adults are finished talking." Lucas nodded solemnly and turned to leave, but Ethan stepped forward and reached for the ice cream container. "I want some, Grandma." "Of course, sweetie," Mom cooed, immediately springing into action. "Let me get you a big scoop. Do you want chocolate syrup too? And sprinkles?" I watched Lucas's face as he processed this exchange, the confusion slowly morphing into hurt as he realized the double standard. This wasn't new. It had happened countless times before. But something about the naked favoritism hit differently tonight. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the drive, or maybe it was watching my sister texting throughout dinner while I'd spent the whole meal making sure my kids used proper manners. Whatever it was, something inside me finally cracked. I first noticed the favoritism 4 years ago, right after Chloe was born. We brought her to meet my parents when she was just 3 weeks old. My mother held her stiffly, commented that she was very fussy, and handed her back after less than a minute. That same day, when Melissa arrived with then 3-year-old twins, Mom transformed into a different person, animated, affectionate, hanging on their every word. "It's just because the boys are older and can interact more," Dan had reasoned afterward. "It'll change as Chloe grows." But it didn't. If anything, the disparity grew more pronounced. At Christmas, my parents showered Melissa's kids with expensive gifts, while mine received practical items like socks and educational books. During summer visits, Melissa's boys were allowed to splash in the above-ground pool unsupervised, while my children needed constant watching because they didn't know how to behave around water. I tried everything to address it subtly. I pointed out my children's achievements, worked extra hard to make sure they were polite and well-behaved, and even had Dan take countless photos of them being gentle with my mother's possessions, hoping she'd notice. "Your kids just don't know how to act in other people's homes," my mother said dismissively last Thanksgiving, after scolding Lucas for leaving a water glass on the coffee table without a coaster, something Melissa's boys did constantly without comment. I'd swallowed my frustration then, as I always did. I'd been raised to respect my elders, to keep the peace, to not make waves. Confrontation wasn't in my nature. But watching Lucas's crushed expression as he walked away from the ice cream table tonight, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my children's sense of self-worth. The next morning, I woke up determined to have a calm, reasonable discussion with my parents. Dan and the kids were still asleep in the guest room we'd been crammed into, while Melissa's family enjoyed the larger guest suite with its own bathroom. I found my parents in the kitchen, my father reading the newspaper while my mother prepared breakfast. "Mom, Dad, could we talk for a minute?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "If it's quick," Mom said without looking up from the pancake batter. "The kids will be up soon, and you know how Aiden gets if breakfast isn't ready." I took a deep breath. I wanted to talk about the way you treat my children compared to Melissa's. My father lowered his newspaper slightly, eyebrows raised, while my mother's wooden spoon paused mid-stir. "What are you talking about?" Mom asked, her voice instantly defensive. "I've noticed that there seem to be different rules for my kids versus Melissa's. Different expectations, different consequences." I kept my voice steady, determined to stay calm. Yesterday, Chloe was scolded for standing near the flower bed, but when Aiden broke a branch off the magnolia tree, nothing was said. Mom waved a dismissive hand. "You're being oversensitive. Boys will be boys. Chloe needs to learn to be more careful." "And what about the ice cream last night?" Lucas asked politely and was denied, but when Ethan demanded some, you served him immediately. "Lucas had been eating candy all afternoon," Mom retorted, though I knew that wasn't true. I'd been carefully monitoring his sugar intake, knowing how my parents felt about hyperactive children, at least my hyperactive children. "The thing is," I continued, my heart hammering, "this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern I've noticed for years now. My children walk on eggshells here, afraid to do anything wrong, while Melissa's kids can do no wrong in your eyes." My father cleared his throat. "I think you're exaggerating, sweetheart. We love all our grandchildren equally." "I wish that were true, Dad, but your actions tell a different story." My mother slammed the mixing bowl down on the counter. "So now we're bad grandparents? Is that what you're saying?" "No, that's not. After everything we've done for you, the money we loaned you for your house down payment, the times we've babysit when you had work emergencies." I felt my resolve wavering. It was true. My parents had helped us financially over the years, something Melissa had never needed with her husband's six-figure income. Was I being ungrateful? "I appreciate everything you've done," I said carefully. "But this isn't about money or favors. It's about treating my children with the same respect and affection you show Melissa's." My mother crossed her arms. "If your children knew how to behave properly, maybe they wouldn't need to be corrected so often." The injustice of that statement stung like a slap. My children were consistently praised by teachers for their manners and consideration. Just last month, Lucas had received a citizenship award at school. "My children are well behaved," I said, my voice finally betraying my emotion. "They're kind, respectful, and considerate, despite being treated like second-class grandchildren in this house." "Now you're just being ridiculous," my mother snapped. "If you've taught them to be so sensitive that they can't handle a little discipline, that's hardly our fault." Before I could respond, Melissa walked in, already dressed for the day in designer athleisure wear, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us. "Your sister thinks we favor your children," Mom said, her voice dripping with martyrdom. "Apparently, we're terrible grandparents." Melissa laughed, pouring herself coffee. "Oh, come on. That's crazy." "Is it?" I turned to her. "You don't think it's strange that your kids can jump on the furniture, leave toys everywhere, help themselves to anything in the kitchen, while mine get lectured for breathing too loudly?" Melissa rolled her eyes. "My boys are just more spirited. Your kids are so, I don't know, timid. Maybe if you didn't hover so much. I hover because every time they do anything here, they get criticized." My voice rose despite my best intentions. "They're not timid at home or at school or with friends. They're only timid here, where they've learned that everything they do is somehow wrong." My father stood up. "I think everyone needs to calm down. We're family. Let's not fight." "I agree," I said, surprisingly steady, "which is why I've made a decision. We won't be staying for the rest of the weekend as planned. I'm taking my children home today." The kitchen fell silent. My mother's face registered shock, then anger. "You're overreacting," she finally said, "running away instead of dealing with the problem." "I'm not running away," I countered. "I'm protecting my children from an environment that makes them feel less than, and I'm giving us all some space to think about whether we want to continue this way." "So you're just not going to let us see our grandchildren?" My father's voice held a note of panic I'd never heard before. "I didn't say that. But for now, I think it's best if we take a break from these visits until we can establish some ground rules about how all the grandchildren will be treated." I turned to leave the kitchen, but my mother's words stopped me at the doorway. "This is exactly the problem. she hissed. You're raising children who don't know how to socialize, who can't handle normal family dynamics. If they fall apart at the slightest correction, how will they ever function in the real world? I turned back slowly. My children function perfectly well in the real world, Mom. They have friends, they excel at school, they participate in activities where they're valued for who they are. What they don't understand is why the people who should love them unconditionally seem to find fault with everything they do. I walked out before anyone could respond, my heart pounding but my mind surprisingly clear. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd finally stood up for what mattered most. The drive home was quiet. Dan had supported my decision completely, helping to pack up our things quickly while I explained to the kids in age-appropriate terms why we were leaving early. To their credit, neither Lucas nor Chloe seemed particularly disappointed. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us? Chloe asked from the back seat, about an hour into the journey. No, sweetie, I assured her, turning to meet her concerned gaze. They're not mad at you at all. Then why did we have to leave? I exchanged a glance with Dan, who nodded encouragingly. Sometimes, I began carefully, adults need to take a little break from each other to figure things out. I need some time to talk with Grandma and Grandpa about some grown-up things. Is it because they like Aiden and Ethan better than us? Lucas asked quietly, not looking up from his book. My heart cracked. Of course he'd noticed. Children always do. It's complicated, buddy, Dan said, reaching back to squeeze Lucas's knee. But what's not complicated is how much Mom and I love you both, and we're going to make sure everyone treats you with the respect you deserve. Even Grandma and Grandpa, Chloe asked. Especially Grandma and Grandpa, I confirmed. The text started before we even reached home. My mother accusing me of creating drama, of ruining the holiday weekend, of using my children as pawns in some imagined competition with my sister. My father, more conciliatory but still missing the point, suggesting we all just forget about the misunderstanding and come back next weekend. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, when we got home, I spent the afternoon playing board games with my kids, ordering pizza for dinner, and creating the kind of relaxed, loving environment they deserved. It was only after they were in bed that I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and began to write a careful, considered email to my parents. I outlined specific examples of the favoritism I'd observed over the years. I explained the impact it was having on Lucas and Chloe. I made it clear that while I valued our family relationship, I would no longer subject my children to an environment where they were treated as less deserving of love and grace than their cousins. I'm not asking for special treatment, I wrote in conclusion. I'm asking for equal treatment. I'm asking you to examine why you respond differently to the same behaviors depending on which grandchild is involved. I'm asking you to consider that the problem isn't that my children don't know how to socialize. It's that they're being held to an impossible standard that their cousins are never expected to meet. I ended by expressing love and hope for reconciliation. But I was firm about my boundaries. We would not be visiting again until we had a clear understanding that all grandchildren would be treated with the same patience, affection, and forgiveness. After sending the email, I closed my laptop and joined Dan on the couch where he was watching a baseball game with the volume low. How do you feel? He asked, pulling me close. Terrified, I admitted, but also relieved, like I finally said what I've been swallowing for years. I'm proud of you, he said simply. And Lucas and Chloe will be too, even if they don't understand everything right now. 3 days passed with no response from my parents. My sister called once, leaving a voicemail full of passive-aggressive comments about how I'd always been the sensitive one and how I needed to get over myself. I deleted it without responding. On the 4th day, my phone rang with my father's number. I answered with trepidation. Hi, Dad. Hello, sweetheart. His voice sounded tired. I got your email. Your mother and I have been discussing it. I see. I kept my tone neutral, refusing to apologize or backpedal. I want you to know that I've been watching some videos, recordings from our gatherings over the past few years. Your mother thought I was being ridiculous, but I wanted to see for myself if what you described was happening. My breath caught. My father, the family videographer, had hundreds of hours of footage from birthdays, holidays, and casual get-togethers. And, I prompted when he fell silent. He sighed heavily. And you're right. I didn't see it before. Maybe I didn't want to, but it's right there on camera. The way your mother speaks to your children versus Melissa's, the different rules, the favoritism. He pronounced the word like it tasted bitter. I showed your mother some examples, side by side. It was illuminating. I hadn't expected this. I'd braced myself for more gaslighting, more blame, more accusations that I was the problem. What did Mom say? I asked carefully. She cried, Dad said simply. Then she got defensive. Then she cried some more. We've had some difficult conversations over the past few days. I'm sorry it's been hard, I said, surprised to find I meant it. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I know, and you shouldn't have had to. That's on us. There was a pause. We'd like to come visit you if that's all right. Just for an afternoon, to talk in person and to see the kids. Your mother has some things she wants to say to all of you. I felt a flicker of hope, immediately tempered by caution. I'd need some assurances first. This can't be about guilting me or making me feel like I've overreacted. It won't be, he promised. This is about us taking responsibility. It's about making things right. We agreed they would drive up the following Sunday. After hanging up, I sat for a long time, turning the conversation over in my mind. Was this a genuine breakthrough, or just another manipulation? Had my quiet rebellion actually made a difference? Sunday arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I'd prepared the kids, explaining that Grandma and Grandpa were coming to visit and that they might want to talk about some important grown-up things. But we're not in trouble, right? Lucas confirmed, his brow furrowed. Absolutely not, I assured him. In fact, Grandma and Grandpa might have some things to say about how they've made mistakes, not you. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. My mother stood on the porch clutching a large gift bag, my father beside her looking uncertain. I invited them in with determined politeness, offering coffee and the banana bread I'd baked that morning. The initial awkwardness was painful. Stilted small talk about the weather, compliments on our home's new paint color, careful inquiries about the kids' activities. Lucas and Chloe were polite but reserved, watching their grandparents with wary eyes that broke my heart all over again. Finally, after the small talk ran dry, my mother set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. I owe you all an apology, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Especially you, Lucas and Chloe. My children looked at her with surprise. In all their young lives, they'd never heard their grandmother apologize for anything. Your mom showed me something important, she continued. She helped me see that I haven't been fair to you. I've had different rules for you than for your cousins, and that wasn't right. Lucas glanced at me, uncertain, and I nodded encouragingly. I don't know why I did it, Mom admitted, and I could see the genuine confusion in her face. I've been thinking about it a lot this week. Maybe because your cousins remind me of your aunt when she was little, always loud and demanding attention. Maybe I felt like your mom had everything under control with you two, so I didn't need to step in. Maybe, she hesitated, maybe I was harder on you because I expected more from your mom than from your aunt. That last admission hung in the air between us. It was the closest my mother had ever come to acknowledging the different standards she'd always held for her daughters, how Melissa's chaos was accepted as just her way, while my mistakes were treated as deliberate failures. Whatever the reason, it wasn't fair, Mom continued. And I'm truly sorry if I made you feel like I didn't love you as much as your cousins, because I do love you, very much. She reached for the gift bag she'd brought and pulled out 2 photo albums. I made these for you. They're full of pictures of us together, times when we've had fun, special moments we've shared. I want you to know that even though I haven't always shown it the right way, you are precious to me. Lucas took his album cautiously, opening it to find carefully arranged photos spanning his entire life. Chloe climbed onto the couch between her grandparents to look at hers, her initial reserve melting as she pointed excitedly at a picture of herself as a toddler on my father's shoulders. As the kids browsed their albums, my mother turned to me, her eyes wet. And you, my daughter. I owe you the biggest apology of all. You tried to tell me for years in 100 small ways, and I refused to listen. I put you in the impossible position of having to choose between your children's well-being and your relationship with me. No mother should have to make that choice. I felt my carefully constructed defenses begin to crumble. This was the acknowledgement I'd been waiting for without even realizing it. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, Mom continued. I know it will take time to rebuild trust, but I want you to know that I've heard you, really heard you, and I'm committed to changing. My father reached over to take my hand. We both are. We've talked about specific ways to make sure we're treating all our grandchildren equally. We want to be better, if you'll give us the chance. I looked at my children, now warming up to their grandparents as they shared stories about the photos. I looked at my parents, imperfect and human, but making a genuine effort to right their wrongs. And I looked at Dan, who gave me an encouraging smile from across the room. I think, I said carefully, that this is a good first step. It's been 6 months since that Sunday conversation. Change hasn't happened overnight. Old habits die hard, and there have been moments when I've had to gently remind my mother of our agreement. But the difference is that now she listens. Now she tries. Now she sees. Last weekend, we visited my parents' house for the first time since Memorial Day. Melissa and her family were there too, and I watched with quiet satisfaction as my mother held Aiden gently but firmly accountable when he interrupted Lucas during dinner. I noticed how she made a point of asking Chloe about her dance recital before turning to the twins' latest adventures. Small things, perhaps, but meaningful in their consistency. After dinner, I found Lucas and Ethan playing video games together in the living room, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago when Lucas was too intimidated by his cousin to suggest an activity. Having fun? I asked, sitting beside them on the couch. Lucas nodded, not taking his eyes off the screen. Grandma said we could play until bedtime, as long as we take turns picking the games. She said I can't always go first just 'cause I'm louder, Ethan added matter-of-factly, and I bit back a smile. Later, as Dan and I prepared for bed in the guest room, the master guest suite, I noted, which my mother had insisted we take this time, he pulled me into a hug. You know what I was thinking about today? He asked, his voice low. What's that? How different this weekend would have been if you hadn't stood up when you did, if you hadn't been brave enough to walk away that day. Our kids would still be thinking there was something wrong with them, something that made them less deserving of love. I leaned into his embrace, thinking about how much courage it had taken to stand my ground, to risk family relationships for a principle that mattered. It hadn't been easy. It still wasn't, sometimes. But watching my children move through the world with growing confidence, secure in the knowledge that they deserved respect and fair treatment, that made every difficult conversation worth it. I'm just glad we're finding a way forward, I said. All of us. In the morning, I came downstairs to find my mother and Chloe in the kitchen, making pancakes together. Mom looked up as I entered, a genuine smile lighting her face. Good morning, sweetheart. Chloe's teaching me her special pancake recipe. It has chocolate chips and blueberries, Chloe announced proudly, standing on a step stool beside my mother, her small hands covered in flour. Sounds delicious, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. As I watched them work together, flour dusting the counter and laughter filling the kitchen, I felt a wave of gratitude. Not just for the progress we'd made, but for the courage to demand it in the first place. Sometimes, I realized, the most important battles aren't fought with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes, they're fought in quiet moments of determination, when you finally decide that being underestimated, overlooked, or unfairly judged is no longer acceptable, not for you, and especially not for your children. And sometimes, walking away is the first step toward finding your way back to something better than before.